Hello and welcome to Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner, and well, I wish I had better news to report. The Minnesota Twins lose 3 out of 4 in Detroit, an ugly series loss, getting shut out in 2 of the 4 games after scoring 9 runs in game 1. Things fall apart on the Twins rather quickly, and they lose 3 out of 4, and Cleveland gains some ground in the standings against when they played Toronto this week. Twins still, though, have a 4.5 game lead. I don't have the standings right in front of me, but around that 4.5, 3.5 game lead in the AL Central, still, according to Fangraphs and a lot of other projections, at a near 90% odds to make the division, and it would take a truly more historic collapse than the season before to lose out on the American League Central. But that's kind of my overarching. We're going to get to the bad in a second here. But overarchingly, my thoughts on this series in Detroit, not good. The Twins lose the season series against Detroit. They, or at least won't win it. I believe the Twins are 6-4 against the Tigers this season. Not necessarily the results you want. Now, the Twins can salvage the season series when Detroit comes back to Target Field next week. But again, you had a chance, even just splitting would have just felt a little bit easier. You would have won the final game, and you would have said, you know what, 4-game series, divisional opponent on the road. Let's split. Let's see what happens, and then let's go to Philly. Losing 3 out of 4, and not just losing 3 out of 4, but in the way the Twins did it, a little bit of sloppy defense here and there, the bats just not showing up. And even in a start where the bats did show up in that middle game of the 3 losses, Bailey Ober fell apart. And we'll get to some of that kind of in a second here, because there's a couple trains of thought on Bailey Ober that I've seen kind of break out on Twins Twitter, and I'll kind of give you my take in a second here. But I think we need to talk first of all about the Twins series against Detroit and just how things kind of unraveled after scoring 9 runs in the first 3 innings. They've only scored 7 over the course of the next 3 games. I think even less than that. And maybe 5 runs over the next 3 games, and getting shut out twice. One, he gets shut out against Erod. You know, that happens. Rodriguez is a really good pitcher. Wish he would have got traded to the Dodgers so he could have been out of the AL Central. But Rodriguez is a good pitcher. And remember, the Twins were interested in him an offseason ago in the 2021-22 offseason, and would have been a good get because he's a good pitcher. He signed that deal with Detroit. And whatever, you can chalk that up and say, hey, their best pitcher threw really well. We got shut out. That's not ideal, but let's go win the other 2 games of the series. And the fact that they did not, and you had home runs from Gallo and Correa. Correa had a sneaky good series in Detroit, but at the end of the day, nobody was really going to talk about that, and really doesn't matter a ton when the Twins lose those games. But Gallo also had a home run, which again, doesn't matter because the Twins lost, even though it gave them the lead at the time. Good for Gallo, but really hasn't done much of anything outside of that, which doesn't, maybe buys him an extra week before getting DFA'd. I don't know. Well, although we're already at August 10th in the season, so who knows? Gallo might just be here to stick around, or it might just be biding time until Kirilloff and or Royce Lewis and or whoever, Byron Buxton, get back off the injured list. But that's kind of where the Twins stand right now offensively. I mean, they had times in the game today. You could say it's a little bit unlucky for Max Kepler, had 2 very deep drives into straightaway center field. But as we know, Detroit's a cruel ballpark when you hit it in that direction, because both of them were caught for outs. The Twins had 2 on, 1 out, runners on the corners and 1 out in multiple innings in today's game. And they just end up stranding. And hitters who have been in a groove right now, like Ryan Jeffers, Ed Julian, Matt Wallner, guys who've been playing really, really, really well. Julian consistently playing well. Jeffers having the highest OPS of any catcher past the All-Star break in baseball. Jeffers is the best hitting catcher in baseball right now. And even he, you have your bad at-bats. I'm not trying to say he's slumping or anything, but he couldn't get it done. You also couldn't get it done with Ed Julian, who's been consistently good. Matt Wallner, who, of course, hit the walk-off home run on Sunday. It's a team that, after sweeping the Diamondbacks, which was a very, very impressive series for them, they go on the road and just have a stinker against Detroit, which, look, the Twins came into this series winning 4 in a row. They win the first game. They've won 5 in a row. And then they lose 3 in a row. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of fans who are really surprised. There's a lot of fans who are trying to, whistle past it a little bit. And I think that there's a lot of fans in the middle who kind of say, look, man, this team is who they've been all year. Every single time they've won 5 in a row, they lose 3 in a row, because that's what this team does. They'll win 5 in a row and lose 5 in a row. They'll win 3 in a row and lose 4. Like, this team is very peaks and valleys this season. If you're surprised by the fact that they've lost 3 in a row, I don't know what to tell you at this point in the season. That's been the Twins' mantra. They're just slightly above 500 ball club. And that means when they lose 5 games in a row, or when they win 5 games in a row, rather, they lose 4 games in a row. And that's kind of how the cycle resets. And yeah, the Twins do have a plus 500 record. They are in first place. And I think that there's some people who are kind of scoffing at that. And I don't think the Twins should scoff at that at all. That's a great spot for them to be in. I mean, they're lucky that they're in the American League Central. And as I've said before, and I even said last year when the Twins were in the middle of their slump and ultimately didn't win the division, I said, I didn't care. Just get the team into postseason baseball and let's see what happens. Maybe they get swept. Maybe they don't. But I'll take the Twins getting into October baseball, even if it leads to heartbreak. It's like the Minnesota Vikings last year. They were 13-4. It wasn't a strong 13-4. That team had massive, massive flaws, and everybody, especially Vikings fans, knew it. But would you trade that away, even though the Vikings lost in heartbreaking fashion in the first round? Would you have taken that? Yeah, of course you would have. You would have taken the ride, even though the ride ends most likely, you're going to end up getting a little bit of whiplash on your neck, and you're not going to necessarily like it. But does that mean you shouldn't have gotten on the ride? Does that mean you shouldn't have gotten on the roller coaster? No, because sometimes in the end, it's going to be a smooth landing, and you're going to have fun with it. And it's going to be like nothing you've ever felt, or so I've been told. I'm a fan of Minnesota sports, and it's past the year 1991, so I don't necessarily know what a championship season looks like. But that's the thing about sports. Every team but one wins the last game of the season, in the words of the Moneyball movie. So if you're sitting there every single year stewing that the Twins lost in the postseason, I mean, I don't like it either. It hangs over everybody's heads. And that playoff loss streak, the playoff series loss streak. Look, the Twins haven't won a playoff game since I was in the first grade. That's not good. So, I mean, I'm not sitting here trying to poo-poo it or say it's no big deal. It is a big deal, but that's why I'm saying this team just needs to get into the playoffs. It's already at 20 games. If it goes to 23, who cares? It's already the longest. It's already been nearly 2 decades. If it goes another year longer, it doesn't matter. But the streak doesn't end if they can't get into the postseason. And that's my view with this Twins team. And it's a disappointing series in Detroit. This team played bad. And not only that, their at-bats looked bad. Especially in a lot of cases. I mean, they're making guys. Detroit Tigers do not have a good pitching rotation, despite contrary belief to I don't know who. Detroit has not good pitching. The Twins had starters outside of Eduardo Rodriguez. The Twins had starting pitchers that they were facing whose ERAs were above 5, and they just look silly against them. I think there's a stat by, I don't know if it was Dan Hayes, maybe it was somebody else on Twitter, who pointed out that against everybody else, the Tigers have an ERA of about 5.5 on the season, and against the Twins, down to 4. And that's just kind of where it's been. The Tigers know how to pitch to the Twins, and the Twins, like they've done every single time that they've been confronted with adversity offensively, they don't know how to respond. And that's been kind of the calling card of this team and of this offense. And again, bad series in Detroit. It's not good. I'm not going to try and sit here and tell you that everything is fine and that, it's okay. It's actually a good thing. And I don't think there's a lot of fans that are saying that anyways, but it's not a good thing to lose 3 out of 4 in Detroit. Everybody is in agreement on that. But again, it's kind of you can't let one series with this team ride or die. And we talk about one game. You can't ride or die with one game. You definitely can't ride or die with one series against this team. You need to take things week by week. And if we're judging this week so far on a Monday through the next Sunday basis, this team is 1-3. That's not good, but they have a chance against Philadelphia this weekend to try and do some damage. Of course, I believe they have a chance to face Michael Lorenzen, who pitched for Detroit, but just threw a no-hitter against the Nationals earlier this week, so that's a positive thing. The Phillies have all of a sudden sneakily been playing some good baseball. They're in the wild card mix. They're not going to win the NL East. Atlanta's running away with that, but Philadelphia is a team that has playoff aspirations. The Twins went to Philadelphia and lost 2 out of 3 in 2019. Philadelphia is not an easy place to play at Citizens Bank Park, but that being said, it's the Minnesota Twins, and what they've done all season long is they'll lose series like these to Detroit, and then they'll win 2 out of 3 against Philadelphia because I don't know how to describe it. It's Minnesota Twins baseball. Experience the heat, feel the magic, whatever. Experience the heat if you like the game plan with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Anyway, so yeah, that's pretty much my main take on the Detroit series. There's a couple other things that we can take away and a couple other things we can talk about here. Mainly, I want to backtrack just a little bit here as I knock my microphone with my hand. I want to backtrack a little bit here and talk about the Joe Mauer Hall of Fame weekend. I got the opportunity. Me and my cousin went down to watch the game, got some standing room only tickets, and just was kind of there. I was there for Joe Mauer's jersey retirement ceremony, which was really fun. And to go to the Hall of Fame induction into the Twins Hall of Fame. Now, why would the Twins do this more than once? Well, the answer is you're going to sell out the ballpark. A lot of people were there, and a lot of people were there early to watch Joe Mauer give his speech. And for all the talk, and I mean, certainly Joe Mauer's second contract and the end of Joe Mauer's career wasn't peak Joe Mauer. And Joe Mauer took a lot of flack for being kind of the highest paying earner on a lot of losing teams. And myself included, by the way, if you want to dig up I don't have any old tweets. I guess I really didn't use Twitter until I was in college, but if you want to go back and find some old takes, I had some really bad takes on Mauer towards the end of his career, maybe towards that 2011 to 2016 range. Just a lot of not necessarily they were bad, like personally, but just things that were wrong on Joe Mauer. And to kind of go back and get the chance towards the end of his career to realize who Mauer was and still appreciate Joe for how good of a player he was. And the guy is the most Minnesotan player we could have ever wanted. I mean, he's from Minnesota. He's got the aw shucks. He's quiet. I mean, he's Midwestern. He's aw shucks. He married a nurse at a children's hospital, I think is the story, because he did a bunch of charity there. He had twins, for crying out loud. His son was at the ballpark for the jersey or for the Hall of Fame retirement thing. Dude looks exactly like his dad. The point is, Joe Mauer is like as tried and true of a Minnesota athlete as we are ever going to get. Like, you got your Chet Holmgrens of the world. Does Chet Holmgren feel Minnesotan in the same way Joe Mauer does? No, like Joe Mauer is the embodiment of a Minnesotan. And that doesn't make anybody less like actually from here. I'm not trying to like make that distinction, like say that Joe Mauer is a better Minnesotan than like Chet Holmgren, who plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA, or like a Tyus or Trey Jones or Jalen Suggs or not Rashad Bateman, Tyler Johnson, who plays in the NFL, played for the Gophers. That's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make, but the point is like, if you want to go as stereotypical Minnesotan as you could, Joe Mauer fits that bill distinctly. And for the reasons that myself 10 years ago was really frustrated. Mauer, he makes too much money. He's hurt all the time. And some of those are fair criticisms of Mauer, being hurt. But also the same thing with Buxton is like, yeah, it's frustrating for a player, and Mauer, and just like Buxton now, doesn't necessarily like that they can't be on the field and helping their team win. Teammates loved both Mauer and Buxton. And for the reasons that Mauer needs to pound the table and flip the catering carts and prove that he's a leader I'm talking about my own experience. I'm not necessarily trying to call anybody out personally, but it's just this vibe of people think Mauer didn't win anything. His teams didn't win anything. Mauer had some great moments in his career, and the Twins don't make the postseason in 2009 without Joe Mauer having an MVP season. The 2009 Twins, record-wise, are a lot like this year's Twins, of just barely skating by in a very bad division. And that team was not good, and they needed Joe Mauer having an MVP season to kind of carry them throughout the year. But individual performance in baseball, especially when you get to the postseason, unless you're a starting pitcher, it's really hard to put the team on your back in the postseason because you only bat 3 times a game. And even if you hit a home run in every single appearance, the most you can do is create 4 runs. And if your team gives up 5, well, what are you supposed to do? So I think about that with the Twins all the time. And so my point is to say is I think myself, judged Mauer way too harshly. Picture the Thanos meme where it's like, perhaps I judged you too harshly. Like that's me with Joe Mauer. And I'm really glad I got the chance to kind of go back and relive kind of the Mauer glory days when you get to go back and look at him and Justin Morneau talk and they play the highlight reel and you get to remember how good of a player Joe Mauer was, even though his career didn't necessarily span as long as we hoped it would and maybe wasn't as illustrious as we hoped it would. Joe Mauer is still a Hall of Fame candidate, and Joe Mauer should get into the Hall of Fame. I don't know at what point in his life it will happen, but Joe Mauer is going to have a plaque in Cooperstown, and it is going to be really fun to get to witness that. But if you were actually at the ballpark, they did a lot of the things that they did during the Joe Mauer jersey retirement ceremony. They played a lot of T.I. Mauer and Morneau were there. They had a lot of former Twins there. You know, you get to see Joe Nathan, Jason Kubel, Michael Kadire. Whether they're in person or whether it was a pre-recorded video. Jim Thome did a pre-recorded video and got a big applause out of the crowd, even though he was in a White Sox polo sitting at a guaranteed rate field. But it was a good day to celebrate Joe Mauer. They played a lot of his old commercials throughout the broadcast, throughout the game. So like in between innings, they would just play his broadcast up on the video boards. And I got to tell you, man, I've said this before on the podcast, and I'll say it again. Those early 2000s Twins commercials were unparalleled. They were so good. Whether it was Kadire sawing Johan Santana in half, whether it was Santana and Joe Nathan in a car together talking about driving and changing speeds and going all fast. And there's a whole bunch of things in those old Twins commercials, and especially the old Mauer commercials. Because Mauer, kind of a funny guy, despite being really milquetoast. Like you feel like on the surface is pretty quiet and dry, but that humor works really well. You know, with those commercial settings, when you look at Joe Mauer and Troy Polamalu in the Head and Shoulders ad, Joe Mauer and Scott Van Pelt in the This Is Sports Center ad, when he gets all the Midwestern stereotypes wrong, then assumes that Joe Mauer's met Prince. Which I think if they were to reshoot that commercial again today, they'd ask him, like, you ever been to the Mall of America? Is that a thing that, like, if you're from Minnesota and you go outside of Minnesota and you talk to somebody and they go, oh yeah, you've been to the Mall of America? And it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess, but it's not necessarily like the highlight of my life. But anyway, those are really good. Those Twins commercials are really good. The well played Mauer ads with the MLB The Show were really, really fun. Joe Mauer being back-to-back cover athletes of the show is still something that hasn't been done, I think, ever. So that's a really cool thing that Joe Mauer got to do. Anyway, I think I'm done with that. I think we've wrapped that discussion up pretty much, but it was a really fun day. I didn't get there early enough to get the specialty pin, but it was fun to see Target Field full, and it's a great atmosphere. And you wonder why they did the jersey retirement ceremony and the Hall of Fame ceremony in separate occasions. And they did it because people will come out to the ballpark despite, maybe everybody's kind of gut feeling that nobody liked Joe Mauer and he was really hated towards the end of his Twins tenure. I was talking with somebody when I got back at my work that they won Twins tickets through our work, through my job, working at the radio station I work at. And I was mentioning like, yeah, I was at the Twins game the other week with the Mauer thing. And he looked at me and he's an older guy. And he just said, I really love watching Joe Mauer play. And that's something that I think we sometimes in the recency bias look at, and how Joe Mauer's career ended and how it kind of soured and everything, not necessarily like his play or anything, just how it kind of didn't get that high note and everything, the way his career kind of finished compared to how it started. But also just getting to talk about how great Joe Mauer was is really fun. And also makes me feel really old because Joe Mauer has now been retired for 5 years, which is crazy. All right, there's a couple things that I want to get to. One, kind of going into that Tigers series again, Kenta Maeda pitched 6 innings of 1-run baseball, gave up the solo shot to Riley Green, and he'll get the loss on the stat sheet, which is why baseball win losses for pitchers aren't necessarily the best barometer of how good a pitcher is. Not to say that they're completely worthless, but it's not necessarily a good buoy. A good beacon, whatever adjective you want to put in there. But Kenta Maeda has been throwing really well lately since basically that start he had in Detroit in mid-June. He has an ERA of about 2.75. His strikeouts have been up. He's been throwing the ball harder. And I hear a lot of people talk about, because this was a thing during the offseason, Well, why doesn't Kenta Maeda, he'll go to the bullpen at some point. Like when Louis Varland was still in the Twins rotation, like what did the Twins do with Louis Varland? Maybe they kicked Kenta to the bullpen because he was struggling up until that point, up until he came back off his IL stint mid-June. Maybe kick Kenta to the bullpen. He could be a long reliever. He could be a guy like that, and you can use him that way. And because that's what he was with the Dodgers in the postseason. The Dodgers would move him into the bullpen during the playoffs because you really only need about 3 starters during the postseason. So kick Kenta to the bullpen. Starters pitch shorter anyway, so have him kind of come in and piggyback off of a guy 4 innings from one, 3 innings from another, and you can set up your bullpen. That kind of logic, and it made sense at the time. But the more Kenta Maeda pitches, and some people are still kind of throwing this idea out, and it's not inherently wrong, and I don't think it'd be a horrible mismanagement of resources. But I think that the way Kenta Maeda has been pitching right now, you cannot let him go to the bullpen. Because honestly, if you look at the Twins and what's the hierarchy, if you were to start the season over again today or start the postseason, how do you order your starting rotation? And I got to tell you, it's Pablo Lopez number 1 and Kenta Maeda number 2. And who goes number 3, whether it's Sonny Gray or Dallas Keuchel or maybe a Louis Varland if he ever gets back up here, or a Bailey Ober, then you kind of figure it out. It's probably Sonny Gray by default. But man, I got to the way this Twins rotation, and here's why I wouldn't move Kenta Maeda. Not only is he dealing, but if you look at Sonny Gray and Bailey Ober, those guys are kind of scuffling a little. Bailey Ober has not thrown this many innings in his professional career. And how much is that wearing down on him? Do you maybe need to call up a Louis Varland to try and maybe go a 6-man rotation, a couple runs through just to give everybody an extra day, because you had to put Joe Ryan on the IL. And we talked last week about Joe Ryan going on the IL and how irresponsible that was. Go back and listen. Bombs Away podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube. You can check out our podcast as well on Twitter and Facebook. Just look up Bombs Away and follow that, so you can hear my thoughts on all that. But when you have the rotation in a spot, as Dallas Keuchel is occupying a rotation spot, if he's on the playoff roster, he certainly won't be in the starting rotation. But for the Twins, if you look at, you have Pablo Lopez and Kenta Maeda, surefire bets. Sonny Gray probably sneaks in because he's a veteran. But at the end of the day, Sonny Gray has not been pitching well outside of a start against the bad St. Louis team. Sonny Gray has these innings where he falls apart. And he's a guy who talks all the time. And I don't necessarily think he's digging the organization. I think this is just how his brain works. It's kind of an interesting dude. He's a guy who always wants to be going further, always thinks he could have gone farther. And that's fine. But in the sense of the fan base reads that as, oh, he's taking a shot at Rocco. Good for him. He should be pitching longer. But if you watch Sonny Gray, he goes about 5 or 6 innings. And one of those, he gives up a 3 spot. He teeters on the brink of collapse every single time. And outside of that St. Louis start where he did go 7 innings, I think only gave up 1 or no runs during that time. He just has these innings where you try and push the envelope with him and he just falls apart. It's, it's like when you have that block of, you have a kid with the building blocks or the wood blocks, and you stack up a bunch of them really, really high. And you got to just try and get it a little bit higher. Let's see how far we can take this thing. And sometimes you go, oh, awesome. Sweet. We got another block on. All right. Cool. And sometimes you put another block on and that whole thing comes crashing down. And that's what it's been like for Sonny Gray during this time period. So Bailey Ober, I think, has just been an innings fatigue. And I think with Sonny Gray, and this comes to a really interesting conversation about Sonny Gray, is do you still offer him the qualifying offer? Because that was kind of the through line and theory of Sonny Gray is, sure, you traded a first-round pick in Chase Petty, who was a high schooler. High school pitchers, are very, they're not necessarily surefire bets to get to the big leagues and be a good starting pitcher, but still a high draft capital you traded for Sonny Gray. You get 2 seasons of team control. You offer him the qualifying offer at $20 million. And if he takes it, great. You have a starting pitcher who can be at the top of your rotation with Pablo and Joe Ryan, and you still have that rotation being deep. And if he doesn't take the qualifying offer, if he rejects that and signs somewhere else, well, the Twins get a first-round pick. They get a compensatory first-round pick. So you still get and Chase Petty was a late first-round pick, so you still get the value, essentially, of a first-round pick plus 2 years of team control for Sonny Gray. But now do you offer Sonny Gray the qualifying offer? Because if I'm Sonny Gray, am I going to get $20 million next year. Now, maybe you get a 3-year deal somewhere, but Sonny Gray is in his mid-30s and he's falling apart. I mean, he's an all-star this year, and that was earned in the first half, but he's been falling apart in this second half. And is that something that's going to make teams be skeptical of giving him $17 to $20 million a year for the next 3 years? Because that is what Sonny Gray is going to command. And the Twins are definitely not going to offer him that money to return, but they will offer him the qualifying offer. But should they? That's the other question. Has Sonny Gray kind of pitched himself out of that contention? Because if you take it, sure, you do have Sonny Gray, but what happens if he continues to only be a 5 and dive guy? Are you willing to pay Sonny Gray $20 million a year or close to it to be a 5 and dive guy because you don't trust him? And that's now, there's still a month and change left in the season. A lot can happen. He can bounce back. I'm not trying to say that he's washed or anything, but it's certainly a concerning pattern because we've already kind of seen it last year. Sonny Gray pounded the table to pitch longer, and he necessarily wasn't great past the 5th inning anyways. A year before, he pitched really well to begin the season, and now things are kind of falling apart for him. But we haven't really noticed because of the top end of Kenta pitching really well and Pablo Lopez pitching really well. And we'll get to Pablo in a second, but I think overall, I don't think if the season ended today, I would not extend Sonny Gray the qualifying offer, and you lose the value of the trade necessarily in Chase Petty. But if Chase Petty becomes a really, really good pitcher, then you kind of lose the value anyways. There's not necessarily scapegoating that value in a sense. My whole point is to say is the Twins love to try and salvage value. It's why they hang on to guys like Joey Gallo way too late. It's why they hung on to Dylan Bundy and Chris Archer all the way through last season. It's why they've hung on to Alex Colomé and J.A. Happ too long. Like, there are these things of the Twins don't necessarily want to move off of their veteran players because maybe it's an organizational thing to show faith in them and try and as a sign of goodwill towards free agents. And maybe more, it's just a sign of this front office doesn't want to admit when they're wrong. And when they admit that they're wrong, it makes them look like you don't want to admit when you're wrong. It's a very public facing job. You don't necessarily want to take the L too many times, especially on a guy like Sonny Gray. So if the Twins try and bring him back to try and recoup more value, then maybe that's how they would do it. But also at the same time, how much value are you recouping when you spend nearly $20 million on a number 3 starter who is only going to pitch for you 5 innings? Because keep in mind, next year's rotation is going to still have Ober. You're still going to have Ryan. You're still going to have Pablo Lopez. Chris Paddock is coming back into the mix. You still have Louis Varland. You have Brent Hedrick. And then that's not excluding any free agents that you could bring in. Could you use that $17 million and instead of bringing in a 5 and dive guy like Sonny Gray, you bring in a 5 and dive guy to kind of be that 5th starter, but you bring him in on $5 million or $6 million, and then you save that $10 million and you can go use it on other things. Again, if the season ended today, I don't extend Sonny Gray that qualifying offer, and I don't think the Twins do either. That being said, before we get to Pablo Lopez, speaking of things on the qualifying offer or options for the Twins next season, Max Kepler is a $10 million option, and based on how well he's been playing lately, if he continues this through the end of the season, like if he's not slumping at the end of the year, if Max Kepler finishes the year hot and even has like a sneaky, decent postseason, maybe not lighting it up, but just fine in the postseason, the Twins are definitely going to pick up Max Kepler's option. Derek Falvey really, really likes Max Kepler and really, really likes what he's brought to the organization. I think it's kind of run its course. It's time to move on. Max Kepler is a league average player. He's been playing above that right now, which has been really good for the Twins and really important for them. And he's certainly been helping them over the last couple weeks. But at the end of the day, we'll see if he can continue this throughout the rest of the season. Because again, when you're a league average player, you have peaks and valleys. You have weeks where you're really, really red hot for 2 weeks and you're one of the better hitters in baseball. But then you also have stretches where you're not. And that's what a league average player is. League average players play like one of the better players in baseball for a week or 3 weeks. And they also play like one of the worst players in baseball for a week or 3 weeks. Because again, like the Twins, when your record is about at 500, and again, league average is about at 100 for Max Kepler, you're going to have that fluctuation of peaks and valleys, and things are going to go up and down. And like the Twins, they win 5 in a row, lose 3 in a row. That's the same thing with Max Kepler. You have 3 good weeks and then you have 2 bad weeks and you kind of go up and down. Max Kepler's in the middle of a good stretch, and I'm not rooting for Max Kepler to fail at all. Here's the thing about guys like Kepler or Gallo or guys who I think have kind of outlived their usefulness on the Twins generally. or like an Emilio Pagan. Does that mean I want them to fail? Absolutely not. They play for my favorite baseball team. I would like for them to succeed. I want everybody to succeed as much as possible, generally, but he still plays for my favorite baseball team. Why do I want Emilio Pagan to fail? Just for me to be proven right? Who cares? I want the Minnesota Twins to be a successful baseball team. I want Joey Gallo to hit home runs. I want Max Kepler to hit the ball well. I don't need my look. If you think pride or vanity or whatever I got, it's nothing. I got nothing in terms of pride or trying to feel vindicated about things. I don't care. I want my favorite baseball team to win as many baseball games as possible. Anyway, that's my thought on Max Kepler. Love him or hate him, he's probably going to be in a Minnesota Twins uniform next year. $10 million, because here's how the Twins rationalize it. Max Kepler is a veteran. He's playing well. Let's try it again. Let's give him another full season. He'll take that confidence into next year. And if you're going to bring in a veteran corner outfielder, they're going to cost about $10 million anyways. So let's use that money on Max Kepler. And Joey Gallo only being a one-year deal means you free up that $11 million to go sign a right-handed hitting corner outfielder. So like the Twins will be able to rationalize. Trevor Larnach will probably get traded in the offseason to make some room. You kind of thin that out a little bit. Matt Wallner maybe takes left field or platoons with a right-handed hitter in left field. And then you have Kirilloff at first base. Like you can see how the pieces are going to move in place. I just am assuming now, because before I didn't. Like a few months ago, I assumed Max Kepler's option would not get picked up and he was kind of a lame duck player. Now I assume, unless Max Kepler finishes the year ice cold, he's going to be a Minnesota Twin in 2024 in the final year of his contract. Does that mean an extension is coming? Probably not, but I could definitely see the Twins riding out 2024 with Max Kepler. Okay, a couple other things I want to touch on. One is Pablo Lopez. And Pablo Lopez has been having a good season so far. Pablo had a really good start against the Tigers on Monday night, 6 or 7 innings, 10 strikeouts or somewhere along there. It's been a really, really good run for Pablo Lopez, and it's been really good this season. Outside of a late stretch in late May, early June, Pablo Lopez has been pitching like an ace, and not just like an ace, pitching like one of the best pitchers in baseball. Now, I'm not a guy who says, well, if you take out the bad things, he's actually really good. I'm not trying to say that, but what I am trying to say is that more often than not, Pablo Lopez has been pitching at a high level. And not just that. I know Pablo Lopez is kind of the Twins quote unquote ace. And I hear a lot of people say, yeah, he's a really, really good number 2 pitcher. And to which I say, no, Pablo Lopez is a true ace. Now, is he Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Johan Santana? No, that's not what I'm trying to say. Think of ace pitchers in terms of how you think of NFL quarterbacks. There's about 5 NFL quarterbacks who are just, you have this guy, your window to win a Super Bowl is always going to be there, and you're always going to be a good team when you have this quarterback. Your Aaron Rodgers, your Joe Burrows, your Patrick Mahomes, your Tom Brady's, your Peyton Mannings. You get my point. But there's only about 5 of those quarterbacks in the league at a time. And my point with ace starting pitching is there's only a certain amount of Zach Wheelers and Max Scherzers and Justin Verlanders and whoever available in Major League Baseball. But does the 8th best starting pitcher, even though he's not a dominant ace, maybe like some of those other guys are, where it's just almost an automatic win every single time they step on the mound? No, but does that mean that they aren't still a number 1 starting pitcher? Because the Twins regarded Jose as their ace, and he did pitch like an ace caliber pitcher a lot of the time. But the thing with Jose Berrios was there was always like a ceiling with him, and you always felt like Jose Berrios was this close to becoming an ace. He was always just so close to becoming that starting pitcher that he and the fan base and everybody wanted him to be. You'd hear Berrios talk about it. He wants to win a Cy Young. He wants to make all-star teams. He wants to do all that. And that's great. And I'm not like trying to clown on the guy, because he did make a couple all-star teams. And, again, in terms of that winning the Cy Young, the talent was there. The stuff is there. It always just felt like he was just so close, but he never could quite get there. And Pablo Lopez is better than Jose Berrios. He is. I know people like to think of it as a 1A, 1B because the contracts are similar. And actually, if you look on an AAV basis, Pablo Lopez is actually making less money, very slightly, not too much, like 18.7 to 18.4 million. You're kind of splitting hairs at that point, but still less money. Pablo Lopez's deal is shorter. Jose Berrios technically has an opt-out for the final 2 years of his 7-year contract with Toronto that he signed after 2021. So that means if he sucks in the last couple of years of his contract, he opts back in and the Blue Jays are stuck with that versus if he does really, really well, he's going to be in line for another extension. He'll push the market, which means that Toronto's going to have to re-up anyways. Like there's a good chance that the final couple years of that 7-year deal are going to have to be renegotiated anyways. Pablo Lopez is locked in until through the 2027 season. So this year, 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, he's in for the next 4 seasons after this in a Twins uniform. And at that point, who knows? We'll kind of see where the future is. Maybe Pablo Lopez is like a true ace and he's going to make a big payday somewhere else, in which case, awesome, man. Go do that. But it's kind of the thing about the Twins, do we want this guy to play really well because he's just going to leave anyways, with some of the, whether it's a free agent, whether it's, whether it's like in hiring, you hear this all the time. Why do we want to hire this guy if he's just going to leave in a year or two? I worked at a TV station where, there was like some people thought of that motto. People are in and out, in and out, in and out. Don't you want to hire somebody who's going to be here for the long haul? And in which case the philosophy of the place I worked at was, no, if you're talented and you're good, we don't care. Like we understand that you might only be here for a limited amount of time. But if you're going to be really good in that time you're here, we'll take it. And I think that's got to be how we look at that. Even though it's a shorter contract, it's still better because it's a little bit more. You're paying Pablo Lopez more money per year than Berrios in the length of the contract. If you just look at the year by year instead of the average annual value. But at the end of the day, you get it for a shorter amount of time, which means the team can dump out if things get worse. And Pablo Lopez gets a little bit more money in a shorter term span. But Pablo Lopez, it's not just that the contract is more advantageous for the Twins, because people talked about, why the Twins, when the Blue Jays signed Berrios to that extension, everybody thought, well, what the heck? That's not like crazy expensive. The Twins could have definitely paid that. The Twins didn't want to go 7 years, even though there was the 2-year opt-out by Berrios. The Twins did not want to commit to 7 years potentially of Jose Berrios because he's starting pitcher and he throws a lot of innings and you're worried about the arm falling off. Now it hasn't. Berrios is having actually a nice season. He was really bad since joining the Blue Jays throughout the end of 2021 and 2022, but he's had a nice bounce back season. ERA of about 3.84. He's been kind of that level of Jose Berrios, which is a really, really good number 2 starter. He's not the ace on his own Toronto Blue Jays team. That's Kevin Gausman. He leads the league in strikeouts. But you know who's right behind Kevin Gausman in strikeouts? Pablo Lopez. You know who's pitched some of the most innings in baseball this season? I think he's top 5 in the American League in innings pitched. Pablo Lopez. Berrios is an innings eater, high strikeout kind of pitcher, and Pablo Lopez is doing both of those at a higher clip than Berrios. His ERA, I know, isn't quite where fans want it to be, but again, if you look at his expected ERA, it's lower. If you look at his FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, which basically is ERA is kind of a track record, earned run average. Here's how many earned runs he's averaged over a 9-inning span. That's more, it's not predictive, it's more recording. And FIP, fielding independent pitching, is more a predictive stat. And if you base it on an ERA scale, Pablo Lopez is pitching at about a 2.7 earned run average, which is really, really good. 2.7 earned run average. And I get, the game still has to be won on the field and all that kind of stuff. But it basically goes to show that Pablo Lopez got kind of unlucky in that late May, early June stretch, but he's been pitching like an ace. Pablo Lopez has been awesome. He's been great. He's been a starting pitcher. And there's been 2 things working against Pablo Lopez. One is he kind of gets cast in that Berrios light of, really good number 2 starting pitcher, but he can't quite crack ace level status. Pablo Lopez is an ace. He's my ace. He's a good starting pitcher. He's a number 1 starting pitcher. And by the way, Pablo Lopez would be a number 1 starting pitcher on a lot of teams. And the reason that we don't think highly of Pablo Lopez, there's a little bit of kind of fan narratives in there because, one, he was traded for Luis Ariz. So there's just always going to be but we traded a batting champion for him. Is he really that good? And if he's a batting champion, and we're going to trade a guy who won the batting title in the American League last year, and a guy who potentially, now Acuna is catching up to him, but a guy who could potentially win the batting title this year in the National League, we traded that. This guy better win Cy Youngs. And again, outside of that one stretch, maybe the conversation shifts. I don't know. But Pablo Lopez made an all-star team this year He pitched really well. He's top 3 in strikeouts. He's top 3 in the league in strikeouts. He's second in the American League in strikeouts. He's top 5 in the American League in innings pitched as a starter. He's giving you what Berrios could give you and more. But because we traded Luis Arraez for him as the Twins, because the Twins traded Luis Arraez for him, and because the fact that he kind of gets cast in that same Berrios-esque light because of the contracts and just because of how the replacement situation has been, it's got a lot going for him. And I write for Zone Coverage. I've even talked with people on the website, and they've said, people don't really want to hear how good Pablo Lopez has been because Luis Arraez. And I get it. I loved Luis Arraez. Like when he got traded, we had the podcast. We talked Lopez is going to be a good pitcher for the Twins. It also stinks to lose Arraez, and he's going to do good things for Miami, but we can't let that kind of look at the value of how good Pablo Lopez has been. He's been cast in that shadow. But man, I just got to tell you guys, Pablo Lopez is good. He was not the number 1 pitcher on the Marlins last year, but the Marlins had the reigning Cy Young winner in Sandy Alcantara. They also had Michael Lorenzen. They had Max Meyer, the Gopher, in their rotation. Like, they had a good starting rotation, did the Miami Marlins. And that's why the Marlins could trade away Pablo Lopez. But Pablo Lopez is a number 1 pitcher. Pablo Lopez is a number 2 pitcher on a really, really good starting rotation. Yeah, he was last year with the Cy Young winner. So yeah, I guess Pablo Lopez would be a number 2 pitcher if he was with the Texas Rangers and there's Max Scherzer and Nate Eovaldi. Yeah, sure. He definitely isn't a number 1 starting pitcher. The Twins have a good rotation this year, and he is still their ace. And I think that goes unnoticed because of kind of that bad stretch he had. And Pablo Lopez every once in a while. And again, they're kind of like he's kind of like Berrios in the sense of gives up the home runs a little too much, has some weird innings every once in a while. But the thing with Berrios is his weird innings always kind of happen later in his starts, it felt like. Whereas Pablo Lopez is like, I'm going to have a weird first or third inning, but I'm going to pitch really, really well after that. My whole point is to say is, guys, give Pablo Lopez his flowers. That doesn't mean you have to say that the Arraez trade was a fleece. I don't think it's a fleece. Twins lost a good hitter who's producing right now and one of the best hitters in the league. You had to trade that up to get a good pitcher. And, I don't think Fangraphs WAR is a good predictor, but their WAR is equal. Pablo Lopez and Luis Arraez. They're like, I kid you, like smack dab equal. 3.3 WAR, FWAR. So it's a wash. Like, yeah, the Twins lost a really, really good hitter and their offense stinks this year, but Luis Arraez also doesn't fix this lineup. He doesn't fix the issues. The Twins last year, going into the All-Star break, I looked this stat up, so maybe things have changed a little bit, but last year the Twins averaged about 4.3, 4.4 runs a game. Not a great stat. It was bottom third of the league in runs per game. And the Twins at the All-Star break this year averaged that same clip. So is Arraez a good hitter, and does he help the offense more than hurt the offense? Of course. But also, is one singles hitter he hits a lot of singles, not trying to scoff at him, but is one guy going to necessarily make or break this Twins lineup and fix it? No, he was never going to. So the Twins got really, really good at pitching, and it's built them more for a postseason success than not having Arraez. I still wish Arraez was a Twin, but at the end of the day, Pablo Lopez he's been just as valuable to this team as Arraez has been, and he's been way more valuable than Jose Berrios would have been. My whole point is to say, guys, give Pablo Lopez his flowers. He's pitching really well. Him and King Kenta in a 3-game playoff wildcard series. You have Pablo Lopez as your number 1 starter, Kenta as your number 2. That sits you in pretty good position to win a playoff series, especially if you're going to play against those Toronto Blue Jays, which would be the situation if the season ended today. All right, one last thing I want to talk about with the Minnesota Twins is the kids are all right in St. Paul. And that's because, of course, Brooks Lee got called up to AAA. So did Junior Severino, and so did Deshaun Kersey, 3 position players that got called up to the Twins. How have they been? Not necessarily great. Believe the batting average in AAA for Brooks Lee is about 188. His OPS in St. Paul on base plus slugging is 364. And it hasn't quite been there yet for Brooks Lee. Now, if you want to look at the numbers, he's only struck out 4 times in 5 games. So it's not like he's necessarily, he's just not connecting yet. And it's going to take Brooks Lee some time. Again, Brooks Lee is 22 years old, playing in AAA. which is very, very aggressive. The Twins have been very aggressive with Brooks Lee coming through the minors, and he's played really, really well. And again, Brooks Lee had a slow start in Double A Wichita this year. So I think the Twins saying, well, he couldn't mash in Double A all year long, but let's get him up to Triple A and get him comfortable with that. So when he faces Triple A pitching in 2024, he can mash on it right away, and he could be a sneaky guy to make the opening day roster next year. Now, I think he'll probably end up coming maybe mid-season or at some point as a call-up, kind of a la Ed Julian this year, like close to making the roster, but he'll stay in AAA and we'll kind of let him earn his way up. But my point is Brooks Lee's been a little slow. I'm not going to get too over concerned about that because it's still 5 games and you got to kind of let these things happen. He's not going to come up and start immediately crushing the ball. And I had a sneaky gut feeling that we could potentially see Brooks Lee in the Twins this year. And the more I think about it, the more I sleep on it, the more I think no, the more I think he's definitely just getting called up because he's earned a call up to AAA, and let him get his feet wet in the final month of the season. And then let him be on a playoff team with St. Paul because they're going to make the playoffs in the independent league. You let him go there and let him do that. And then you kind of figure it out next season. Junior Severino has been another guy who's been kind of going up the Twins minor league charts. And he has an OPS right now with the Saints of 735. He's hit a couple home runs. He has a 188 batting average. And his strikeouts, he's only struck out 4 times. Again, he's got 1 home run. He's got a couple RBIs. But when you look overall at Junior Severino and you look at Brooks Lee, I was about to call him Bryce Lewis. I don't even know what the heck that means. Deshaun Kersey as well. A bit of a slow start in St. Paul. Actually, never mind. I'm looking at the wrong stat here. He's got a 763 OPS, which isn't great, but isn't bad either when he's only played 5 games for the St. Paul Saints. He's had 5 hits. And you look at home runs, he's had 0, but 4 RBIs. He's had a couple stolen bases, drawn a few walks. The whole point is to say with the math for the Minnesota Twins, even though the kids aren't necessarily producing at a high clip and they're not mashing AAA, them getting their feet wet is huge because while the Twins don't necessarily have a lot in the tank outside of Walker Jenkins in low-level prospect kind of hype outside of maybe Walker Jenkins and I'm blanking on his name for whatever reason, but he's in single A and he's just been mashing the ball all year long. I'm going to remember it as soon as I turn the podcast off. I'm going to look the guy's name up. But the Twins have had success. He's had some success in the low minors. We'll kind of have to see how that develops. But again, they're being aggressive with some of these guys with the Kerseys, with the Severinos, and especially with the Brooks Lee. And it's going to be really interesting. And again, Walker Jenkins, he's been playing in the Florida Gulf Coast League, which is basically just playing at the Twins spring training site. The number 5 overall pick, who could be a number 1 overall pick in some drafts. Like if he were to stay and go next year in the draft, he'd be a number 1 overall pick, or at least be thought of as a number 1 overall pick. It's a very deep draft. The Twins took Walker Jenkins. He's played really well in the week's worth of Florida Gulf Coast League games that he's played in. He's been hitting really well, had a little bit of power, but mainly just been slapping the ball around. And he's got a sweet left-handed swing and could be very useful for the Twins in 2027. But again, he's got a long way to go. But how? Because he's 18 years old. Brooks Lee is 22, and he's still young for a prospect to be in AAA. So it's going to take some time. But how aggressive the Twins are with some of these guys is kind of fascinating because the Twins were aggressive with Royce Lewis, pulling him up early and pulling him up from AA. And do the Twins do the same thing with Brooks Lee? Next year, the Twins do the same thing with the development of Walker Jenkins. How does that process work out? It'll be really fun to see. So anyway, that's kind of my thing. The podcast went a little bit longer than I thought it was going to go, but that's good because I love talking Twins baseball and a lot's kind of happened since we've last talked. And it's just good to talk Twins and good, even though the Twins lost 3 out of 4 against the Tigers, that's not great, but I still will take this Twins team into the postseason and let's see what they do. So let's keep tracking this Twins team. Appreciate you guys for listening. Again, you can catch this on the Bombs Away YouTube page, Facebook, and Twitter, where you can find the full podcast. Also, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's been Bombs Away. I'm CJ Baumgartner. We'll see you next time.